World Empires Series Part 5, Rome, Herod and the New Testament World Chapters, 2330-63 BC 70 Add Introduction. When we last left the story, the Hellenistic world was ending and Rome was rising. In 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey entered Jerusalem and walked into the temple's Holy of Holies. He looked around at the empty room, no idol, no image, just empty space representing the invisible God of Israel, and was reportedly astonished. He did not loot the temple treasury, a restraint that earned some grudging Jewish respect. But from this moment, Judea was in Rome's orbit. And the stage was set for the most consequential series of events in human history. Chapter 23, Rome takes Judea. Rome's relationship with Judea went through several phases in the century before Jesus. Initially, the Hasmonean kings, descendants of the Maccabees, maintained a degree of independence as Roman clients. But a civil war within the Hasmonean family in 63 BC gave Pompey his opportunity. He sided with one faction, entered Jerusalem, and made Judea effectively a Roman vassal. Julius Caesar proved a better patron for the Jews than most. After the Jewish general Antipater helped him in Egypt, Caesar rewarded Jews across the empire with significant privileges: exemption from military service on the Sabbath, permission to collect the temple tax, the right to gather for synagogue worship. These privileges, confirmed and extended by subsequent emperors, gave the Jewish diaspora a unique legal status in the Roman world. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, the power struggle that followed left Judea caught between Roman factions and vulnerable to Parthian pressure from the east. The Hasmonean Antigonus briefly seized Jerusalem with Parthian help in 40 BC. But the Roman Senate had already made a decision that would determine Judea's fate for the next 40 years. They declared a man named Herod to be king of the Jews. It would take him 3 years of brutal campaigning to make it real. But in 37 BC he took Jerusalem, and the Hasmonean dynasty was finished. Chapter 24, Herod the Great. Herod the Great is one of history's most contradictory figures, a man of astonishing achievement and terrifying cruelty, and understanding him is essential to understanding the world into which Jesus was born. On one side of the ledger, Herod was the greatest builder in Judean history. His remodeling of the Temple Mount was an engineering achievement that still staggers engineers today. He doubled the size of the platform. The Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, is a retaining wall from his construction. He built Caesarea Maritima, a spectacular deepwater harbor city on the Mediterranean coast, essentially from nothing. He built Masada, the desert fortress that would later become famous as the last holdout of Jewish rebels. He built the Herodium, his own Palestum. He rebuilt Samaria. He built aqueducts, palaces, and fortresses across his kingdom. On the other side, Herod was consumed by paranoia. He executed his beloved wife Mariamne, a Hasmonean princess, on suspicion of plotting against him. He executed her mother. He executed his own sons. The Emperor Augustus is said to have quipped that it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son. The massacre of the innocents, recorded in Matthew's Gospel, Herod ordering the killing of infant boys in Bethlehem, has no Roman confirmation, but it is entirely consistent with his character and documented pattern of behavior. Herod also faced a deeper problem of legitimacy. He was Idumean, from a people who had been forcibly converted to Judaism a generation earlier. Many Jews never accepted him as truly one of them. He was Rome's man. He ruled because Rome said so. And he knew it. Chapter 25, the world of the New Testament. To understand the Gospels, you need to understand the extraordinary variety of Jewish religious life in first-century Judea. This was not a monolithic community with a single theology. It was a world of intense debate, competing visions, and fervent expectation. The Pharisees were the dominant religious movement and the main sparring partners of Jesus in the Gospel narratives. They believed in the oral Torah alongside the written, in the resurrection of the dead, in angels and divine judgment. Their successors became Rabbinic Judaism after 70 AD. The Sadducees were the temple establishment, priestly aristocrats who accepted only the written Torah, rejected resurrection, and worked closely with Roman authority. They largely disappeared after the temple's destruction. The Essenes lived in isolated communities, most famously at Qumran near the Dead Sea, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were produced. They believed they were the true Israel, awaiting God's imminent intervention to destroy the wicked and vindicate the righteous. The Zealots believed that violent resistance to Rome was a religious duty. Their agitation drove the events that led to the Jewish War of 66 to 70 AD. And threading through all of these groups was the concept of the Messiah, the Anointed One, the deliverer God would send to restore Israel. Different groups had very different ideas about what this meant. It was into this saturated world of expectation, this tinderbox of hope and frustration, that Jesus of Nazareth stepped. Chapter 26, Jesus of Nazareth in historical context. Let us be precise about what history can and cannot say about Jesus. This is not a theological question, but a historical one. What can be established from non-Christian sources? Tacitus, writing around 116 AD in his Annals, confirms that a man called Christus was executed under Pontius Pilate during the reign of the Emperor Tiberius. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing in the 90s AD, references Jesus in two passages, one of which has been edited by later Christian copyists, but which most scholars believe preserves a genuine reference. Both sources confirm the basic historical fact of Jesus' existence and execution. Pontius Pilate himself, long known only from the Gospels and Josephus, was confirmed archaeologically in 1961 when the Pilate stone was discovered at Caesarea Maritima, a limestone block inscribed with Pilate's name and title as prefect of Judea. What the historical consensus broadly accepts, Jesus was a historical Galilean Jew, born probably around 4 BC, baptized by John the Baptist, who gathered a following around his teaching, was crucified under Pilate around 30 AD, and whose disciples immediately reported that he had been raised from the dead. Where history stops, whether Jesus rose from the dead is a theological claim, not a historical one. Historical method cannot adjudicate miracles, but it can establish the facts around which that claim was made, and those facts are remarkably solid. Chapters 27 through 29, Paul, the early church and the Jewish war, the story of how a small Jewish sect in Galilee became the largest religion in the world within 3 centuries, is one of history's most dramatic transformations. The key figure in that transformation was Paul of Tarsus. Paul, Saul before his dramatic conversion on the Damascus Road, was a Pharisee who had been vigorously persecuting the early Christian movement. His encounter with what he described as the risen Jesus turned him into the movement's most effective advocate. His 3 missionary journeys across the eastern Mediterranean, planting churches in Corinth, Ephesus, Philippi and Thessalonica, took the movement from its Jewish Galilean origins into the Greek-speaking Gentile world. His letters 1 Thessalonians, Galatians, Romans 1 and 2 Corinthians are the earliest documents in the New Testament, written before any of the Gospels. The Jerusalem Council of 49 AD was the pivotal moment, a decision that Gentile converts to Christianity did not need to observe the full Jewish law. This opened the faith to the entire Roman world and began the process of separating Christianity from its Jewish parent. In 66 AD, after decades of Roman misrule and zealot agitation, Judea exploded in revolt. The Jewish war that followed was catastrophic. Vespasian's Roman army, then completed by his son Titus, besieged Jerusalem. The temple burned on the 9th of Av, 70 AD, the same calendar date as the Babylonian destruction 5 centuries earlier. The Arch of Titus in Rome, still standing, shows Roman soldiers carrying the temple menorah in triumph. The destruction of the temple ended the Second Temple period and forced both Judaism and Christianity to reinvent themselves. The Pharisees, gathering at Yavne, rebuilt Judaism around Torah and prayer. Christianity, already largely separated from Judaism, developed independently. The 2 faiths that would shape the next 2,000 years of history had found their separate paths. End of Part 5.